And financial planners, we are counselors at the end of the day. That's like 80% of what we do. Now we're focused counselors. We focus on the topics of money, and money is one of the biggest stressors.
So welcome to the Money Alchemist podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brent Gargano.
Yeah, and I'm Ben Jones.
And today we are here to talk about, we kind of joke. Both of us, Ben and I, we're both involved in our local financial planning association chapter. The Financial Planning Association is a national association of financial planners kind of dedicated to trying to provide education and with a commitment to helping make planners better. And so as part of that group, we go to conferences and do things to learn ourselves. And we recently sat in on a presentation that was on the differences between financial stress and financial anxiety, which, at first, Ben, what the heck is the difference between financial stress and financial anxiety?
Yeah. So here's the thing, about this topic. It's one of these things where, these educators, these professors, the academics, they're honestly, they're bored out of their minds. They're sitting in their offices. They're in between classes, and they don't know what they should do to justify their salaries. So they come up with these deep studies on things that nobody else is thinking about. And one of those is, the difference between financial stress and financial anxiety. Who actually thinks about this, and why is the distinction even meaningful to people? That's my take on the whole thing. But it is interesting. The further you dig into it, it does open up very interesting conversations, which is why we're talking about it today.
Yeah, I think that, just to push back a little bit, while I recognize that it is kind of, I kind of jokingly say, what's the difference between one versus the other? But when you start talking about it, and when you work with clients like we do, you definitely can think about situations where characteristics of financial stress versus characteristics of financial anxiety exist. So the difference, just to get us started, the difference between financial stress and financial anxiety, as defined by those educators that you were so nicely referring to, is that financial stress actually, or any stress, is a result, or it's a reaction to a stressor. Mm-hmm. So if you have stress, there's a stressor inducing the stress. Financial anxiety, on the other hand, is not triggered, right? So even if you remove the stressor, the stress still exists. So where this kind of applies to financial planning, so part of the reason we wanted to tie this in and talk about this. So yesterday I had my first class. I teach a financial planning capstone class. So we talk about the practical applications of this. And yesterday we had our first class, and I put out a case study. And in the case study, there's a husband and a wife, and there's a lot of financial stress. Okay. They're in their 50s. The wife's parents live overseas. They're aging. She wants to help them. They have plenty of money. I think in the case study, they have roughly $5 million, and they say that they think they spend $80,000 a year, but they don't know. But husband and wife are clearly fighting over how much money to spend on the kids' college, how much longer they need to work for retirement. It's causing stress. But the kicker is, if you run their financial plan, which is kind of our next class, we're actually going to run their plan, there's no reason to be stressed. They could do everything they're talking about, like if they retired a year ago. And so it brought up this question of, how do you help as an advisor or as somebody handling your own finances? How do you distinguish, kind of the appropriate time to have financial stress, because it's not good to rack up credit card balances because you're not worried about, how much you're spending. there are good reasons to have a stress reaction to poor financial decisions, but also having financial anxiety where you're, unnecessarily doing things or unnecessarily unhappy about your finances. So how do you react to that?
Yeah. As you were talking, I was listening, by the way, but I do have a fun tangent here. Do you want to hear Grok's definition of the difference between stress and financial stress and financial anxiety? Because I asked Grok to to summarize this article for me. By the way, an article that we're referencing is in the show notes. It's published by kitsis.com. It's titled "Distinguishing Financial Stress from Anxiety and Client Communication Strategies to Help." It is a rather dense article, so I wouldn't blame you all if you just listen to this podcast and skip the rest. But according to Grok, financial stress is generally a response to a specific identifiable issue where the person can still take action despite feeling overwhelmed. Financial anxiety, on the other hand, involves a more pervasive, often irrational worry that can paralyze action.
Okay, so the difference is that, well, I mean, I think that's exactly what I just said. You weren't listening. So that's what I said, right? I mean, you just like in my case study, you have a client. The case study is very clear. You have a client, they're in their 50s, they've saved a lot of money. To give some more context, the husband's parents in the case study had his dad had gambled away a lot of their life savings before the end of his mom's life savings. And so there was this fear that the husband had that they didn't have enough money. And so it was causing them in a kind of like you use the word paralyze, but it was keeping them from actually making the decision to retire and do some of the things they actually wanted to do. And so, when you think about what it's worth to have a financial plan, like let's not even talk about a financial planner, but to have a financial plan, because there's plenty of people that could, you can model at least your own spreadsheet, maybe get somebody to double check it. But the benefit of having a measured plan is that at least you're doing things for warranted reasons.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me that, financial stress, which is like your response to, not having enough money at the end of the month, or maybe here's a perfect example because I just closed on a house. Will the closing be done in time? Will the wire transfer go through? Will the loan underwriters perform their responsibilities in time? By the way, they didn't. It was not a smooth process. I won't go into that unless you want me to, but that's an example of financial stress. It's very, it's acute, it's temporary. Usually it's a signal of something that needs to be responded to. It's not necessarily unhealthy. It's just something that is unpleasant. Whereas anxiety, like your example you gave me, was that which is very interesting, that this person's attitudes around money stem from, their father gambling. And it was not necessarily rational, but it kind of was. It was based in something, a rational fear, but it became irrational over time in his response to his spouse. Well, I don't know if it's in response to spouse, but like in response to like his behavior around spending money.
So a lot of the students would ask me, so what happened in class was I passed out this case study and I grouped everybody up, and then I would go around to the groups and see what everybody thought. And the students would ask me, what do you do to help these people resolve some of the conflict in their marriage that revolves around money? And then I would ask the students, I would say, so I asked every group, do you think they have enough money to retire? And interestingly enough, I got a lot of, well, they can't retire yet. Their kids still have to go to college and, things like that. But when you actually backed out and did the plan, I also got some feedback that like that, wow, this is a lot of information all at once. And it is. Somebody's financial life is a lot of information that you have to figure out how to condense down and view big picture and put a lot of pieces together. But once you put it in the plan, it worked out fine. So the question is like, how do you help? As a financial planner, so much of our job revolves around how do you, and these were all things that the students picked up on. They did a great job in picking up on, okay, there's, a lot of cash in IRA accounts, and the 529s aren't allocated properly, and the estate plan is, so all of those things are good. And as a competent financial planner, you should do them. But, how do you take what you provide for clients one step further and help resolve money conflict in their marriage?
Yeah. So let's bring some context into this conversation because it's more interesting, like real life examples. So let's focus too, not on financial stress, but on financial anxiety, because I think that's the big problem maker in a lot of relationships. And your example reminded me of something, an experience that I had. It was probably 8 years ago, where I was meeting with a couple clients, very successful clients. The individual worked for the government. Had a very nice. The husband worked for a very nice pension plan. Enough to make me jealous. I was like, I'm in the wrong career. But and then she was an executive for a local company, and they did a wonderful job at saving into the qualified retirement plans. Outside of the qualified retirement plans, by qualified retirement plan, I mean just like 401k plans, TSP, things like that.
Their company retirement account.
Yeah. So, they came in, they met with me, and we built this this wonderful financial projection. I put them in the financial plan. By the way, if you want to know my opinion on financial plans, go check out my last article on carrotstick.com. I actually detailed, how I feel about financial plans. I do like financial plans. Let's just preface that.
The plan itself is a waste. The process is.
Exactly. But I digress. So back to the example. So I did one of those boilerplate off the shelf kind of, financial plans that you get from every financial planning office. So I'm guilty of doing these for people because they are useful to an extent. But in this scenario, I'll tell you where it failed catastrophically. So I sit down with this couple, plenty of money. It was obvious to me that they had a successful financial or successful retirement ahead of them. So, we had this meeting. I went through the Monte Carlo analysis and everything was fine. And then I ended the meeting. And then it was like 3 days later, I learned that the wife had been stressing out about the meeting ever since we had it. So for like 3 days of sleeplessness. I had no idea any of this was happening. Like I learned this because I called to follow up on something and then she was just beside herself. She's like, she thought that I was saying that they were poor. Come to find out, when I finally peeled back the layers of the onions, okay, where is this misunderstanding? Because, the financial plan was successful. The reason why she felt that way and she was having so much worry is because I was telling her she could not spend any money until they retired, which that was in her mind a long way off. At that time, I think it was like 10, 15 years. I mean, these are multimillionaires, by the way, that we're talking about.
But you can't touch the retirement account.
All that money was in retirement. And she thought, she thought it was fake money. She didn't think it was real. In her mind, it was untouchable. And it was true. Like when you looked at their plan, they didn't have anything in near term. Well, they did, but it wasn't substantial. So, and she wanted to go to Europe. She wanted to buy a new car. I think she wanted to do some home remodeling. Now, none of this came up in the meeting, which is my fault because I did not prompt for it. I did a very poor job in saying what, and I've since I've learned from this experience and pivoted. And that's why I've almost pivoted completely. And now I focus way more on shorter term goals because I think people are more motivated by them than longer term goals that are ambiguous in nature. But anyway, read my carrot stick article. But she had been worrying about, that is a perfect example of financial anxiety. It's something that's not really reasonable. It's not based in something that's what I would consider as a financial professional reasonable, but it was very real to her. and it was causing her to lose sleep. So, financial anxiety can take all sorts of forms.
Well, and I think that highlights an interesting point. And I think this is why it's so relevant to talk about the value of reducing financial anxiety, because you're right. Financial stress, I mean, it's real. There's real reasons to be stressed, but financial anxiety is unnecessary. So how many people are out there living their lives perfectly financially healthy, but are unnecessarily anxious? And what's the result of that anxiety, and how does that impact the life that they live and the way that they spend their money and the way that they use their money and all of those things? So I think in your case, if you, I mean, I'll kind of a hot, well, my opinion on this is that maybe she was putting too much in retirement accounts.
Yeah.
Right. And it's never like great. I mean, of course, the more money you put in retirement accounts, the more well off you're going to. It's never like, quote, good financial advice to say put less money in your retirement account. And if you're only considering having more money. But if you think about why you're doing, are you doing it because you're anxious and you want to just make sure that everything's covered, or are you doing it because you actually need to do it? And, I think with proper planning ahead of time, you can, at least if you're going to end up with those kind of balances in retirement account and nothing else, you can be purposeful about it. But hopefully maybe you save a little bit less in retirement accounts. You have a little smaller balance, but your retirement still works out okay. And you can afford to go to Europe, because there's so many people that of course you want to save for the future. Of course you don't want yourself to be broke 30 years from now, but your life may be different 15, 20, 30 years from now, and you might not be able to use money in the same way. And there is a value to using your money today, and to be able to do that without the guilt that kind of is associated through that financial anxiety is really interesting. We talked earlier about the concept of a retiree and giving a retiree a budget and why you would do that. And I thought what you said was, it's not a budget, it's a spending plan, right? You're not giving somebody a budget to tell them, here's what you need to spend. You're giving them permission to go use their money in an effective way, right? And sometimes that, especially as a planner, I know that both of us have seen in people's lives, reiterating that permission to spend and revisiting the planning process as opposed to a one point in time plan helps ideally reduce some of that financial anxiety and encourage somebody to live a more purposeful, enriched life.
Yes. So I think that the word budget is, what is the name for that kind of word? It's a pejorative, where
you're a better dictionary than me.
Well,
what is it?
Pejorative. It has a negative connotation to it. So it biases the listener to think, I need to tighten my belt, so that's a negative associated with it. Where, when I think about budget, I really don't, I'm not thinking about it.
You can buy that new house, right?
Yeah, it is more of a spending plan. You're right. And when you think spending plan, now you're thinking, okay, well, I can spend my money. But, I do want to touch on some common sources of financial anxiety, because there's so many of them that we can touch on and elaborate in. And I want to get your opinion on this one that I get constantly, and it affects young people in particular. Well, almost exclusively young people. And I see this all the time. And you ever read that, like the millennial and Gen Z attacks on boomers? Did you ever come across this, where like they hate baby boomers because baby boomers have all the wealth?
Yeah, we've talked about it.
Yeah, we've talked about it, but that's a common thing. But what kind of is a manifestation of that is, I think that our young people today are so geared for instant gratifications. I look at my kids and they play video games, they play Minecraft, and it's like things are easy. They get immediate like feedback, immediate endorphin hits,
dopamine hits.
Dopamine hits. That's the right word. I think back when I was a kid. Now I know I'm starting to sound like an old dude now, but like back when I was a kid, I put on rollerblades. I got out my hockey stick and I went into the cul-de-sac and I scraped up my knees and I learned how to play street hockey with my neighbor's kids. Like there was no instant gratification. It was fun. Same with skateboarding. I would do kick flips and things like that. And, this stuff was like, hard to do, but the rewards when you pulled off that, that perfect kick flip, you were like, dang, man, that felt so good. So it like, gives you this expectation of delayed dopamine, whereas I think younger people don't have that as much as we did growing up. And TikTok is the perfect, thing to illustrate my point. It's like, I was in the sauna the other day, and it's not just young people. I don't want to pick on young people. I was in the sauna the other day at the YMCA, and looked around. There was like 5 guys in there. It was one of those days where there's way too many people in the sauna. But every single one of these dudes was like, had their freaking cell phone and they were just scrolling through. I think the guy next to me had his AirPod in. He was listening to something. So I was like, okay, I'll give you credit. I was the only one there. It was just me in the sauna. But there's this guy next to me, probably in his 60s on TikTok, one video, next video, next video. I'm like, oh my gosh, man, what is going on? Anyway, so I think what that expectation that sets is that as soon as I get in my career, I'm going to have immediate success and I'm going to be a millionaire, and I'm going to have a ton of money. And there's a lot of young professionals, very smart people that I sit down with, and we set up Roth plans and, we put together a savings plans. I have to say, like, it's probably been about 10 clients this has happened to over the past 5 or 6 years, where we'll set up this plan and then we'll meet with them and they get frustrated because it's not good enough. And it's like, dude, you've had like 20% performance the past like 3 years on average. Like, this is better than expected. And, but there's just so much anxiety. It's like, I'm not getting there quick enough. And I think this is also fueling a lot of this speculation. This is why we're seeing a lot of meme stock activity, a lot of, crypto projects go bust. So what are your thoughts on that and your experiences around that?
Well, I think it's easy as a young person to get excited. I'll tell you a story. When I was in college, I remember I bought Domino's pizza stock. We're not soliciting stocks here. I don't own this stock or anything like that. But I bought Domino's pizza stock and it doubled in a couple of months. And I sold it and I made a couple $100 and I felt great. I was like the coolest kid on campus because I had, I was making money in stocks. I'm sure, that even to today, I'm sure you have students that are making, a lot of money on XYZ, name a, crypto coin or whatever. Right. So it's easy to feel like that's attractive. But the hard part is if you have $1,000 and you go out and you 10X it, you're only making $9,000. And it's not to say, $9,000 as a 23-year-old is definitely a lot of money, but it's not life-changing money. Mm-hmm. What is life-changing as a 20-some-year-old is to learn the habits that help you build wealth over time. Mm-hmm. And I think the irony in that is that chasing the kind of quick penny is sometimes a lot of times counterproductive to those habits that really are more an indicator of your long-term wealth over time, right? So I have a chart in a presentation that I give to college students about investing after college, and it talks about how much money you would make if you invested $10,000 per year for 40 years, so from 25 to 65, and it assumes an 8% return, whatever it is. The first 24 years of those 40 years only gives you 20% of your total earnings. So think about this. You've got a 40-year span of time, and the first 24 years, 60% of it, you're only earning 1/5 of your total interest because of compounding, right? Compounding works. The earnings get bigger as the money gets bigger, and it takes time. It's like rolling a snowball down a hill, mm-hmm. right? And so it ends up being a big deal. You end up with something like, $2.7 million, but of that, only like $400,000 is principal. So you put $400,000 in, you've got $2.7 million or so, roughly. And it just takes a lot of patience to be able to see that bigger picture and not get distracted along the way with exactly what you referenced, which is like, it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like how many times, going back to TikTok, that like our clients and us, you look through TikTok and you see a reel that says your financial advisor says you 8% return, 8% returns, more or less, screw that. You need 20%, right? That kind of thing. And then they're inevitably showing you some life insurance strategy that they want to sell you. But the point is, while a 7% return doesn't sound like a lot, compounding is more impactful than people realize.
Well,
and I think a lot of the people that are listening to this that are, have been invested for a long time recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
But getting somebody who's 20 years old to see that can be challenging, especially when their friends are talking about their most recent crypto purchases.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, young people today, they are bombarded with a lot of messaging, surrounding wealth. I think about, like, you ever watch those Mr. Beast videos?
Oh yeah.
Oh my
I love
God.
Mr. Beast.
I kind of mixed feelings about the guy because he just throws money around like it's nothing.
I think he plays on human emotions through the money, and it's very interesting.
It is interesting, but you can also see through the eyes of someone who's 18, 19, 20 years old or even younger that, wow, here's this young guy. He's got all this money. It comes easy to him, so therefore it should come easy to me. And when they find out that it doesn't, that creates a lot of financial anxiety. And that's what we're talking about. And it can cause a lot of young folks to abandon sensible behavior. This happens to older people too, by the way. I don't mean to pick on young people, but young people are especially susceptible to this. And you end up, like you said, you get 20% of your wealth in the first, was it
20%?
20% of your wealth and 80%?
20% of your earnings.
Yeah.
So of the if you ended up with $2.7 million, $400,000 of contributions, $2.3 million of gains, the first 20 years, you 24 years, you only get $400K of that.
So but it's impossible for someone in the moment to really conceptualize.
24 years is a long time.
Yeah, it is a long time, and most everybody I find lives pretty darn close to moment. I think most people can't even look 3 years out. Right. True visionaries can. So there are some visionaries, like Jeff Bezos would be one of them. Like, this guy saw Amazon, and he saw it like many, many years out. But the vast majority of us are not Jeff Bezos. We're just living pretty much day to day. We may have an action plan and some New Year's resolutions here and there. And, but for us to conceptualize like how much it takes to generate a tremendous amount of wealth up front, it's just too far. And when we're bombarded with these messages of like wealth come easy, that creates that disrupted signal, where distorted signal, where we're viewing reality through an incorrect lens.
Right.
And that distortion creates that anxiety we're talking about. And you got to be aware of that. So when you feel that anxiety, I think of anxiety as something that's a healthy response. I know people, I can tell a personal story about this if you don't mind. We'll shed some color on it. All right. So I used to think of anxiety as a problem. I have if you looked up the word general anxiety disorder, like, that's me. At least that's the way I thought. I'm like, man, I've got general anxiety disorder. Just go and look at it. Like, what I've learned since is like everybody has general anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
Because anxiety is common. But I remember I was talking to my doctor. I went to just a physical checkup, and the doctor was asking how things are going. And I'm like, man, I'm just stressed. I'm working all the time, and I got this going on, that going on. He's like, yeah, man. He's like, you got anxiety. And I was like, oh, I got anxiety. I got anxious about having anxiety. So he's like, here's a prescription, man. He didn't say it, like they said it professionally. He actually gave me a prescription for an antidepressant. And, I went on this thing and I was on it for 2 years and actually had medical side effects from this thing. Like it was the wrong move. And this sent me down this journey of like, what is anxiety? How do you address it? Like, what's the true, cure for this problem? By the way, I find now for me, like for some people, medications work, I'm sure. For me, it actually caused massive heart palpitations. Like I had to go to a cardiologist, which then dovetailed into me getting declined for health insurance. Like, it was like or not health insurance, life insurance. So it ended up being like this big ordeal. So for me, antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication was like it compounded the problem. But it did one thing beneficial, and that is it taught me to have a healthier view on anxiety. And I view anxiety as a signal. My anxiety is a signal. It tells me that something is awry and it needs to be addressed. And I would encourage everybody, anyone who has financial anxiety out there, like find out what that signal is. And the only cure for it is hard work. And what I mean by hard work, not necessarily like shoveling gravel or something. I mean, you have to figure out, you have to be introspective. And you have to figure out what is the core that's causing that problem. Because back to your example of the husband who had the anxiety around spending money, and it really the actual genesis of that issue was his father gambling. Like that's hard work to kind of figure that out, because you got to lay yourself out,
Well, and what I told the students is, because they asked me again, back to their question, what do you do to help these people start thinking about things? And I want, what you don't do is try to say, hey, husband or hey, wife, don't you see the other person's point? What I chose to do, and the way that I demonstrate it in my class is we actually run the financial plan as it's given from the client. So everybody wants to say, well, are they right about their expenses? Answer, probably not. Are they? But, they don't pick it apart at the beginning. Just listen and understand and take it at face value and plug it in and see what's there. And it turns out in this particular case, when you plug the finances into the Monte Carlo analysis, the way they give it to you, they have a 99% chance of success, which is the best score that you can get in the planning tool. They pass away with $26 million. And, they basically way oversaved, and they stressed about.
Was that helpful to the person that was the husband? Was that helpful to him in addressing that anxiety? Was like, hey, I have enough money. Because in my view, or I wouldn't say view, but my assumption is like that really doesn't address the core. The core was, he didn't want to gamble with his future.
Well, I think that's fair, but I think you have to start with, what does your future, what does your future look like? And, how does it project? Now, obviously, diversification, there are so many times where people get frustrated about diversification, right? Because it mutes returns, right? If you're diversified and one of your investments goes gangbusters, your whole portfolio doesn't do as well as it would if you had more in that. So you always want more in that. But, diversification helps manage a lot of the chances that you could just drain all your money to zero. But I think that's further along. I think the beginning step is just to help start getting them to realize that there is enough money, because I think you're kind of coming under the assumption that the guy's ever done something to understand how much money he needs. And I think just putting that out there unassumptively at the beginning and not, and just asking how they feel about that helps begin. Because like you said, you called it hard work. I think in your 50s or 60s, you're not going to fundamentally change who you are. So you have to kind of begin this process of self-realization. You have to realize you have you have a problem, but you have these stressors or these triggers.
Well, I think facing your fears, regardless of where you're at. So in this particular example, I know we're kind of we might be reviewing it too much because I do want to talk about some other potential vectors of financial anxiety. But this particular example, I think that it's very difficult, and I would consider it hard work for this individual to face that fear of running out of money. And what I mean by hard work is it's difficult for someone like that to just wrap their minds around the true risks that his financial plan, the true risks to his financial plan. So because it's difficult for everyone to change their bias, and that's what the hard work is you got to shift your way of thinking,
But
and
it's
the way
so important because how much time is wasted and resources are wasted that could be repurposed for better uses in your life.
So back to the point, financial anxiety is a signal to tell you that something is off, and you need to figure out what that is. And if you don't know how to figure out what that is, that's when you probably should be working with some sort of counselor, and financial planners, we are counselors at the end of the day. That's like 80% of what we do. Now we're focused counselors. We focus on the topics of money, and money is one of the biggest stressors. Yeah. Hence the topic of today's conversation, financial anxiety. So, we've got financial anxiety over not getting money quick enough. We got financial anxiety over, having plenty, but you don't have permission to spend, or you're afraid of running out of it. And in fact, that's kind of a big one because I find a lot of people have a hoarding mentality when it comes to capital. And maybe we should take a tangent here and talk about this topic because it is interesting. I'm torn whether or not that's something that we should support. We like the zeitgeist should support, or if we should discourage. Because is asset hoarding necessarily a bad thing? Because what I look at is like my job is to optimize my clients' quality of life. Like, for some, that means minimizing volatility. For others, that means maximizing returns. For others, that means number go higher. That's all they care about. I do have people I work with that are retired, and they literally just live off of Social Security and pensions, and they would have conniption fits if a dime was taken out of their portfolio, and God forbid they reach the age of required minimum distributions. They're forced to take money.
Even though there's like almost, besides maybe some long-term care needs, which are relevant, but there's, almost no purpose for this money.
Exactly. No, I shouldn't say that. There is a purpose for this money. The purpose is they see it and they like it. And when they go to bed at night, they pull up their online access or their financial statements, and they look at them and they go, and then they hug them and they take it to the bath with them, and and they walk them outside like with their dog. They just love to see the number go higher, and that gives them quality of life. And who am I to say that that's wrong? And for a while, for like a couple, maybe years or so, I took this tact of like, it's my mission to tell my clients to spend their money because, God forbid the last check to the underwriter clears. We want to spend every last penny. And I found myself in a couple meetings where clients were like, I'm kind of uncomfortable with that. Like I was saying, go buy a new car or go take a vacation. And they just didn't want to. I'm reminded of a client of mine, and I'm careful not to name names or anything, but this individual is of the greatest generation and lovely person, immigrant, and lives off just Social Security, multi-millionaire, all the lights in the house off all the time, no cable TV. This person's forced to have a cell phone by the children, doesn't want it because of the expense. And here I'm in the meeting trying to tell this person, like, you need to spend this, that, and there was this one time that I had them invest in a concert. They paid for the family to go to an Adele concert, and they all had a wonderful time, but never did it again because spending that money caused this person a tremendous amount of like anxiety, even though they know they can't take it with them. We've had multiple conversations about it.
Do they want?
We've done an estate plan.
Do they want their kids to have any money?
Yes, they do, and they understand that they do. I'm just saying, like, sometimes the source of financial anxiety is actually withdrawing the funds, and they don't want to. And what's your opinion on that? Like, do you think we should all spend as much money? Like, I'm harking back to Book Ecclesiastes, where the wise man calls it a great evil to give money as an inheritance to your survivors. It's chasing after the wind, a great evil.
Well, it's in practice, it's really hard to, I mean, if you have money, it's really hard to put a plan together to die with zero. In theory, you could go take all of your money and put it in, some kind of annuity, and it pays you income until you're gone. And then there's no money left, and you'd have complete certainty, quote unquote. Right. So theoretically you could do it. Well, it's
taking it to the extreme. I mean, take it to a lesser extreme.
But in a practical sense, you're always building a financial plan around planning for the worst, hoping for the best. So when you run a plan and you have somebody invested to some extent and withdrawing money to some extent, there's a level. I think the way that I address it is like, where is your comfort level as far as probability of success? I mean, this is a very technical way of defining it. I know I wouldn't define it this way in a client meeting, but like our guy that's really nervous about losing it, like he might want his financial plan to always score a 90 or a 95. Because, he really needs to make sure we are really buttoned up. Right. But I might have somebody else that is more willing to be flexible and wants to try to be a little bit more aggressive at drawing their assets down. And maybe they are comfortable running their plan at a 70% chance of success or a 75% chance of success. Right. And so I think back to the case study that we spent too much time on or whatever, for me, in a lot of meetings, when I have these meetings with clients, I just simply ask the question, how do you feel about leaving your children this kind of money? And I think the way that they react to that question and the way they answer that question, and the way they digest that question gives you a lot of information as to how you then start backing into manipulating levers to achieve that, right? So if they look at you and they say, I don't want to leave my kid money, or they say, I want to leave my kid a ton of money, that has a lot of different implications as far as how much risk you might take.
So what you're saying is you like to pour on additional anxiety onto the situation.
What do you mean?
I'm teasing you. So basically this individual has anxiety about, their anxiety is basically not having enough. And then you tell them, I'm just jiding you, by the way. So, and then you tell them, well, not only should you have that anxiety, you should also be worried about, enriching your kids and not spending any of the money.
No, I'm just saying that it's your question was, how do I feel about people and leaving their kids money?
Yeah. And I worded it kind of
but
in a joke.
I guess my point is, I think it's really important as the planner not to interject my feelings about whether they should spend, whether they should save, whether they should leave their kids money, whether they should leave money to charity. That's really not my business or job. My job is to help them start to think about what they could do so that they can actually bring ideas that maybe wouldn't have been in their head before to the forefront and start thinking about what they do want to do so that they can articulate that and I can help them do it. Right. So I don't know that my job is to say, well, you shouldn't leave money to your kids, so you should spend more. Although if you don't want to leave money to your kids, we probably ought to be purposeful about how we think about that in your plan. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So in this case, like what you're doing, if I may define, your process is like you like to um, address irrational anxieties with with more realistic situational data, and then you address and you try to nudge their anxiety and the proper direction. So by and that's what I said when you add additional anxiety. You're not adding additional anxiety. You're adding like a counterbalance to their way of
I
thinking.
just want to help them live in reality, and I want to show them what reality looks like. I mean, it's projection, right? So you never know the future, but as close to we can get of a realistic future and visualize that a bit so they can start to ask those next level questions that your brain, again, back to the very beginning, your word was paralyzed. Your brain is paralyzed. It's not able to start thinking about those next level questions. So if you can start living a little bit more in reality and calm some of those nerves, you can start to get at some of the deeper wants, needs, and goals, right? We make fun of goals, but anyway.
Yeah, and it's tough to do that without someone to offer that guidance. You're acting as a counselor in these scenarios, and when I said it's hard work to address anxiety, it's hard work to kind of find direction. If you're lost in your own perspective, and and there's no horizon to reference, you need a guide. You need a guide to, that points like go here, go there, because otherwise you're just wandering around in your anxieties. And I find that, that problem is becoming more pernicious. It's not, it's getting worse, not better. Especially with like this instant gratification culture that seems to be accelerating. Now, I do see some signs that that's kind of turning around a little bit. For example, my brother-in-law uses a flip phone now. That seems to be a new trendy thing among.
Really?
Yeah.
It seems like an odd trend.
It's happening, man. And also too, you're seeing a trend amongst people, alcohol consumption is going down.
Oh yeah.
Per capita. So there's a lot of things.
Well, there's probably bigger context to that, but.
I see where you're going with that. Enough said. All right. Anyway. Well, we do want to close up with this. We didn't get into as many anxiety scenarios as I was wanting, but I think we covered enough. We don't need to cover this subject anymore. I guess the main takeaway for the listeners is if you get a sense of financial anxiety, it's not a stressor. This is not something that's temporary and then it'll go away. If you just feel constant anxiety about your financial situation, whether you're chronically worried about running out of money, or that your investments aren't performing as much as you would like them to, whether if your career trajectory is not going as quickly as you want it to, or if you just feel like things are constantly tight, there's all sorts of different ways financial anxiety can creep into your life. Just take that as a signal. That is a signal that something's off. And if you have difficulty sitting down with yourself and being introspective and identifying that, the core of the issue, you really should consider, sitting down with a counselor that can help you. Because the only way to address that is with, is by guiding yourself away from that, away from the precipice of anxiety and back onto the core path where there's more of like an equilibrium in your life. So, and I see life as you're always being nudged by anxieties left and right. There's no state of equilibrium where you're not going to have anxiety. You're always going to have it.
Well, and on the good side of this, right? I know a lot of people that we talked about money hoarding. And so if you have money anxiety, yes, have a counselor. Financial planners do a level of counseling, but come up with some level of financial projection. You really want to live in reality with where you're going. And it's important that you have a basis and a process to understand what that reality is so that you can guide your decisions in a rational manner and kind of fight that lizard brain inside. So anyway, I know we talked about this for a while, so thanks for taking the time.
Yep. Thanks for listening. determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Any company names noted herein are for educational purposes only and not an indication of trading intent or a solicitation of their products or services. Advisors associated with National Wealth Management Group may be either 1. Registered representatives with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC, and investment advisor representatives of National Wealth Management Group. Or 2. Solely investment advisor representatives of National Wealth Management Group and not affiliated with LPL Financial. Investment advice offered through National Wealth Management Group, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial.